So when we're talking about the professional managerial class, when we're talking about the bourgeoisie, there are certain people who in the bourgeoisie story represents, whatever the topic is. So like Bernie, for example, represents the furthest left radical in the US empire. And this genocide in Gaza is no different. But what's weird about them, and when I say them, I mean the establishment, main corporate media. What's weird in this instance is that the guy they are now making the face of ceasefire for this genocide is a pro-Israel, pro-genocide, but in a slightly less, pro-apartheid state Zionist named Bernie Sanders. And let's listen to this Bernie Sanders, because there's many different Bernie Sanders. Let's listen to this version.
I want to just clarify one thing, Senator, if I might. You support a humanitarian pause in Gaza. Some of your fellow progressives say that there should be a full-on ceasefire, which would require an agreement on both sides to halt the fighting. Do you support a ceasefire? And if not, why not?
Well, I don't know how you can have a ceasefire, permanent ceasefire, with an organization like Hamas, which is dedicated to turmoil and chaos and destroying the state of Israel. And I think what the Arab countries in the region understand, that Hamas has got to go. So
I want to just clarify one thing, Senator.
Now, let me go to another video. He just repeats the same thing. It's not like he's saying something different, but it's important to play it again. This is him on Face the Nation this time.
In terms of a permanent ceasefire, I don't know how you can have a permanent ceasefire with Hamas, who has said before October 7th and after October 7th that they want to destroy Israel. They want a permanent war. I don't know how you have a permanent ceasefire with an attitude like that.
So that guy, or I should say this guy, and there's many different headlines. I'd rather play the video than read articles because it's quicker. But we all know the headlines of him getting protested at his office by his own people, his own staff signing the letter. We know all the stuff that happened in the first several months of this massacre in Palestine and Gaza. He was on the wrong side. Now, 100,000 dead bodies later, he's now the face for some reason. And let's start here. This clown, Bernie Sanders, goes on Pod Save America to be the face of the Palestinian resistance. That's a better way of saying it. So Bernie Sanders is now the face of Palestinian resistance, the same guy who poo-pooed 5,000 dead Palestinians, 10,000 dead Palestinians, 15,000, 20,000, 25,000. When it got around 30, then he starts saying shit. But they bringing him on as if he's the one to go to. You think that's coincidence?
In a call today, President Biden told Netanyahu that, quote, the strikes on aid workers in the humanitarian situation are unacceptable. He underscored that an immediate ceasefire is essential and said that, quote, U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate action to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers. How do you take that statement? Do you take that to mean that he might be finally ready to budge on conditioning aid?
See,
or?
as you know, there have been a lot of statements.
Yes.
I mean, one day I'm angry. The president is angry in that.
I must say this. This is such a feature of this reactionary system, is that they squabble over crumbs, and they make the squabbling over crumbs this long, drawn out process to where now we're just focused on trying to see who wins this small crumb. And now it's all we talk about. So conditioning aid is sort of that thing that's coming up. Where he's moving so radical about conditioning aid. So that means the money, they're still getting the money. We just have a hurdle they must leap over in order to get the same money now. But we're going to be talking about how, and going back and forth about just conditioning aid and how it's so this or so that and so drastic and such a pivot from what it was when it's a crumb. A crumb. So let's listen to the sellout, the cuck, Bernie Sanders.
He might be finally ready to budge on conditioning
We'll
aid.
see.
Or?
As you know, there have been a lot of statements.
Yes.
I mean, one day I'm angry. The president is angry at Netanyahu. The next day he's very angry.
Right.
And the next day he's very, very angry. So what? At the same time, there is support for more military aid. We're talking about $10 billion in a supplemental bill that I voted against. For that reason, I'm not going to give Netanyahu another $10 billion.
You see how this is the courageous part in the framing of the establishment. Oh, God, Bernie is so courageous. Look at him standing. What do you mean? He already gave him enough money to commit a genocide. And because he's saying the current genocide where we're at 100,000 dead Palestinians, I don't want to give you more to kill another 100,000? So now he's the face of Palestinian resistance? The fuck out of here. But this is the establishment. So Bernie is out there. Bernie is the one sacrificing for humanity in their framing. When to us, he's just a fucking clown who supports the same thing. But there's a rainbow flag on the bomb instead.
In military aid to continue to kill women and children in Gaza. Now, I hope, the president is not stupid. And I know the president, and he is at his heart a very decent human being. I know he's hurting from what's going on. Now, why they have continued this policy, if you ask me that question, I cannot give you an answer. I have some speculation, I have some guesses, but I wouldn't even say it publicly. I don't know why. But I would hope that the president understands that from a moral perspective and from a political perspective, because that young Palestinian in Michigan is not the only person. The polls are very clear. A majority of the American people, I think the last poll I saw was like 52%, think the United States should stop military aid to Israel.
And there we go with why you have finally reached this conclusion, Bernie Sanders, that people have been telling you to reach since October and November. Because now this shows how cowardly this fucking piece of shit is. Because now that everybody's here, and this is so classically a social democrat, so classically what these AOCs and these AOC did the same thing. She was protested against because she wasn't seeing a genocide, and it was so much pressure. And she saw the polls. Oh, the vast majority of Democrats want it now. All right, now I can say it. That's the same thing for Bernie Sanders. These people are pretty despicable. That's why I say, why are we trying to save them with the squad? For what? So we can be gaslit?
And among Democrats and among young people, the numbers are much higher. So the president is now engaged in a very, very difficult campaign. So from a moral perspective and from a political perspective, I hope very much that what he's saying today really does indicate a change of policy. But we will know. You cannot continue to talk about your worries about humanitarian situation in Gaza and then give Netanyahu another $10 billion or more bombs.
Ain't that something? That's the same exact thing we said months ago, Bernie Sanders. And you told people to get the fuck out of here and call the police on them. Call security, I should say. This guy's fucking terrible.
You cannot do that. That is hypocritical.
That's hypocritical. The hypocrites.
In a call today, President Biden told Netanyahu.
Shit. You like that? We always like when that happens. Here's more Bernie bullshit. Let's listen. This is CNN.
And we're back with our world lead. President Biden today making a previously unscheduled phone call to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This after an Israeli strike killed 7 aid workers in Gaza on Monday. The White House says Biden told Netanyahu that Israel needs to implement, quote, specific, concrete, measurable, unquote, steps to protect civilians and aid workers in Gaza. With us now, Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. He's been voting against new aid for Israel as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has worsened. Secretary of State Blinken today said that if the U.S. does not see changes to protect civilians in Gaza, there, quote, will be changes in our own policy, unquote. Do you believe them? I mean, I feel like we've been hearing this for a while.
Well, I think you make a good point, Jake. Look, the bottom line is we are looking at one of the worst humanitarian.
You see, Bernie Sanders tells you he's a coward all the time. You just have to listen to what he says. I'm going to rewind this. Listen.
And we're back with our world lead. President Biden today making a previously unscheduled phone call to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. This after an Israeli strike killed 7 aid workers in Gaza on Monday. The White House says Biden told Netanyahu that Israel needs to implement, quote, specific, concrete, measurable, unquote, steps to protect civilians and aid workers in Gaza. With us now, Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. He's been voting against new aid for Israel as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza has worsened. Secretary of State Blinken today said that if the U.S. does not see changes to protect civilians in Gaza, there, quote, will be changes in our own policy, unquote. Do you believe them? I mean, I feel like we've been hearing this for a while.
So, the anchor says, yeah, U.S. official says this, but they basically said this shit before. You believe it, shit, Bernie? Then Bernie proves his cowardness.
Well, I think you make a good point, Jake. Look, the bottom line is.
Let's say Bernie Sanders was honest and Bernie Sanders could wave a magic wand and have this stop. Do you understand that Bernie Sanders would have stopped this at about 40,000 dead people? That guy is looked at as some sort of hero. And the reason the establishment and their PR arm of the establishment, known as mainstream cable news, the reason they feel comfortable with a person like an AOC or a Bernie Sanders talking in this way, because they know this person has a limit to their radicalness, because they know this person is a sellout. They won't ever bring on a Jamu Baraka and ask these questions so he can say some real shit on TV. They bring on sellouts who know how to speak the rhetoric when it's time. And he is obviously giving Bernie Sanders the go-ahead, the green light that you can be as radical as I want by that question. And Bernie Sanders says, no, I'm good. I didn't get an apple from the teacher today because he's a teacher's pet.
We are looking at one of the worst humanitarian disasters that we have seen in a very, very long time. We're literally, at this moment, looking at hundreds of thousands of children starving to death because Israel is not allowing the humanitarian trucks into Gaza, and especially into the areas where people are in most desperate condition. To my mind, Israel should not be getting another nickel in military aid until these policies are fundamentally changed. So if, my view is no more military aid to Israel when children in Gaza are starving.
So the realities for the political realities for Netanyahu, I'll get to the political realities.
So what happened, Bernie Sanders, prior to October 7th, when atrocities were happening in Gaza and you were funding them? Why didn't that policy apply pre-October 7th?
Reality for Biden in a second, but the political reality for Netanyahu is his prime ministership depends on the far right wing zealots, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who are anti-Arab racists. He depends on them. He needs them to stay in power. He needs to appease them as Arab and Palestinian rights and lives are discarded, both in Gaza and in the West Bank and in Israel. Is there any way towards a satisfactory end to this conflict as long as the prime minister of Israel is trying to appease the likes of
racists?
Ben-Gvir.
And Ben-Gvir is not the only racist to everybody there. If you are If you are propping up or a member of the state of Israel, how is that? How are you not a racist? That'd be like you're part of the apartheid state of South Africa. How is everybody in the government of the apartheid state of Africa who are pro the apartheid state of Africa? I'm not talking about being elected like a shaman. So I'm talking about those who are pro South Africa apartheid, those who are pro Israeli apartheid, which is the vast majority of the people in government in Israel.
Veer and Smotrich.
Well, that's the answer is no. And our job is not to worry about Netanyahu's political future. That's not our job. Our job is to make sure that American taxpayer dollars is not complicit in allowing Netanyahu's military machine to kill innocent people and to result in mass starvation.
Before this year, 2023 was one of the deadliest years in Gaza. Bernie wasn't saying this in 2023.
And I think what the people of Israel must understand, and I am pro-Israel, I support Israel, but they cannot continue to wage this immoral war against innocent people and expect taxpayers of the United States to support them. That has got to end. We've got to move to a two-state solution. The brutality in the West Bank, as you just indicated, illegal activity on the part of the settlers must end if they want support from the people of the United States. Hopefully, that will give support to people in Israel who understand that this right-wing extremism is bad for them and bad for their place in the world.
What do you say to people? I asked this of General Hertling in the last hour. I get asked this, and I wonder what you say. Because you are a supporter of Israel. You worked in a kibbutz when you were a younger man.
Right.
And you've always been pro-Israel. That doesn't mean pro-Netanyahu.
Pro-Zionist.
What do you say to people who say, this is not fair, it's a double standard? Hamas started this on October 7th. Hamas wants to destroy Israel. Hamas wants to kill Jews. Hamas hides behind their own people. Hamas doesn't care how many Palestinian civilians die. All of which, in my opinion, is true. What's your response when people...
I'm going to let him answer this. This is where Bernie Sanders, he goes from his radical hat and puts on his white moderate hat. This is the white moderate saying you're too hard fighting against apartheid and genocide. Your tactics, Nat Turner, are too rough to break the chains of slavery. So let's listen to Bernie Sanders.
When people say that...
I would agree with you. Look, Hamas is a terrible, terrible terrorist organization that started this war. And what I have said from the beginning, Jake, Israel has a right to defend itself and go to war against Hamas. That's what I believe. I think most people believe. But you do not have a right to damage or destroy 70% of the housing units in Gaza. You don't have a right to displace 80% of the population, throw them out of their homes, put them into this area, put them into that area, deny them food, water, medical supplies, and fuel. That you don't have a right to do. So the answer is, of course, Hamas began this war. They are a terrorist organization. But the United States is not funding Hamas. We are funding Israel. And what it's got to be made clear to Israel, you can go.
The real terrorist organization, I've heard enough from this clown, Bernie Sanders, but this is the mealy-mouthed support that so-called pro-Palestinian humanitarians give. This mealy-mouthed support, where the people who are trying to break the chains of genocide and apartheid, you condemn for their tactics as you supply the weapons to the people who are committing the atrocities against those people. You, sir, are a clown. And let's listen to him sell out his own Bernie Nation. Let's listen to him lie to Bernie Nation. This is Bernie Sanders lying to his own people.
Here, can you, in good conscience, ask your supporters to vote for Mr. Biden?
Well, look, the contrast that I think President Biden made it very clear in the State of the Union address. If you believe that climate change is real, you got to vote for President Biden. If you believe that women have a right to control their own bodies, you got to vote for President Biden. If you think that at a time of massive income and wealth inequality, you don't give trillions of dollars in tax breaks to the 1%, you've got to vote for Biden. If you want to lower the cost of prescription drugs, you got to vote for Biden. If you believe in democracy and involving people in the process rather than keeping people from voting, you have to vote for Biden.
So this is Bernie Sanders lying to Bernie Nation. The same person who's committing the genocide, facilitating the genocide, 83% of the bombs dropped, I can't remember what month I got that number from, came from the US. How can you say there's a massacre happening, a genocide happening in Israel? You were saying massacre in Israel, starvation in Israel. How can you say that and then at the same time say vote for the guy who's helping to facilitate that? And then you telling your people, Bernie Nation, this is the best option. Bernie is disgusting. He is disgusting. But you know somebody who's more disgusting than him? Debbie Wasserman Schultz responds and doesn't agree with the mealy-mouthed description, the milquetoast description of what's going on, that Bernie Sanders, that's too much for her. So I didn't know she was this staunchly of a Zionist. She is a Zionist radical. Like, she believes like the stuff that Rabbi Smelly talks about. I call him Smelly. Rabbi Smelly, she's that level out there. Listen to this.
So I'm interpreting that as a no. You don't agree that Israel should not get any more military aid until they change their policies, as Senator Sanders suggested. He said the Congress is. Well, let me just. Oh, okay. You're saying they did change their policies, but
so yes, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. If you haven't seen the footage, she's one of the people who says that Israel is the top country who looks and abides by international law and humanitarian. She said that. So Bernie Sanders says funding to Israel should be conditioned. Now, remember I said this is now where we're talking about a crumb, because they're not talking about stopping the money. They're saying putting a fake condition on it. She's saying they've already met the condition. Listen to this clown shit.
So I'm interpreting that as a no. You don't agree that Israel should not get any more military aid until they change their policies, as Senator Sanders suggested. He said the Congress is. Well, let me just. Oh, okay. You're saying they did change their policies, but their overall.
She said they've already changed their policies. Oh, 40,000 dead people. Yeah, that happens. But we changed our policies.
Overall policies in Gaza, they've changed that.
When President Biden spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu, after that very difficult conversation, Israel opened up the Erez crossing and ensured another access point, is stepping up humanitarian aid to make sure that more gets in, had that investigation and had there be accountability and consequences as a result. And that's what needs to happen. More aid gets in. That's what we as a delegation communicated with the Prime Minister last week. But
she's talking about 350 trucks when thousands are needed. So again, the feature of this system is that they deal in crumbs. That's what all of these conversations are about as far as politics. They have an entrenched view, the empire, and then they talk about crumbs. The crumbs is the changes, but they're literally hairline thin, like a hairline fracture in your arm. These are crumbs of crumbs that we are debating, that they're saying is this and that. This is literally what she's bringing up. They're opening up crossing, getting more humanitarian aid in. Somebody paid for the killing of the humanitarian aid workers. You mean that bullshit firing of somebody?
We also have to make sure that a deal is reached, that Hamas accept the deal on the table. It's a 10-to-1 ratio of Palestinian prisoners who are terrorists that killed Israelis to every one hostage. That deal needs to be accepted.
So you heard what she's saying. The lies. This is what they're the prisoners. That's why they keep calling them prisoners. This is just semantics. These are Palestinians have hostages and Israel has hostages. But the ones Israel's have in their custody, they call them prisoners. And she's the one who wants to call them terrorists. In a previous video we just watched with Abby Martin, she was just quoted saying the vast majority of the people in prison are political prisoners. Threw a rock at an IDF officer. The vast majority haven't been charged. Similar to Guantanamo Bay.
So that there can be a ceasefire for 6 weeks and ensure that we can get the hostages out, get humanitarian aid in. The ball is in Hamas's court right now.
So Bernie Sanders is Millie Mouth and Milquetoast, and then Debbie Wasserman Schultz is to the right of that. I would label her an unhinged Zionist. Some of them are just regular
So
Zionists.
I'm interpreting that as a no.
But she
you don't
is
agree that
absolutely unhinged. She's on Rabbi Smully level. That's who she is. And then let me show you this. We're still on Bernie Sanders. Look at this. This is the latest thing Bernie Sanders is being called out for on, I guess, social media. This is TikTok. Twitter. Let me applaud the president for using every possible tool to reduce student debt. Instead of giving more tax breaks to billionaires as Trump has proposed, President Biden is providing financial relief to millions of low-income and working-class Americans. It's the right thing to do. So let's see some of the response that he's getting from this bogus-ass tweet here. Here goes one. Bernie is so terrified of becoming a Nader, that is Ralph Nader, that he has become a Joe Biden. Miscalculations of the century, and that's if I'm being nice. Then we have Pat, just Pat. Pat the socialist. Jesus, Bernie sucks. And that's enough. But the point being is that there's something like 1.7 trillion with the T of student loan debt. Biden is canceling millions, and they want us to give him a pat on the back. That's how they want you to come out, or this is the reason why they want you. This is a bait to try to get students, try to get young people back into the Democratic coalition and get them back to the polls. When, if you're watching this, if you're in earshot of this, and you are thinking of supporting Biden because of any student loan forgiveness, understand that is payment for 2020. So anything they forgive was for your support in 2020, is not at all for your support in 2024. So accept the loan forgiveness and don't vote for Genocide Joe. Simple as that.